Welcome back to Smoke and Mirrors and the continuation of my two-parter on superhero games. In the previous video I talked about 2019's Marvel's Ultimate Alliance 3 by Team Ninja, a game that I enjoyed but had some issues with. And in something of a continuation of that theme, in this episode we'll be looking at Marvel's The Avengers, released in 2020 by Crystal Dynamics. Marvel's Avengers is a game that strives to give players the feel of the bombastic team moments of the Avengers films, while having it fit within the confines of a more typical live service action game. Players deploy into missions all around the Earth, fighting off swathes of enemies in an effort to, well, mostly just get to the end of the mission area. In the previous episode on Ultimate Alliance, I talked about the lack of responsiveness from enemy AI combined with the issue of regular goons being able to take down powerhouses such as the Hulk. But quite often the narrative and the specific characters introduced throughout the story that you can swap to help keep that from coming to the fore. Now, in Avengers, this isn't an issue that can be easily mitigated, because the game is built to have you play a relatively limited roster for very long periods of time. In the main story mode, you'll play as Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, for most of the early chapters, but even when you can swap, the game slowly adds a very limited roster, and the first additional character you unlock is the Hulk. This is where my issues with the combat elements become all the more apparent. Firstly, there's the difference between light and heavy attacks. Across all characters, enemies with shields and other defensive measures need to be hit with a large charged heavy attack before you can break their defense. The ridiculous part is this is the same whether you're playing as either of the two Hawkeyes, two normal strength humans with swords and arrows, Black Widow, a trained assassin with gadgets and guns, and the likes of Thor and the Hulk. In fact, the charge-up time on the Hulk's attacks are so slow that you often get interrupted by some tiny soldiers as you try to pull off the attack that will bring down their shields. There's no real acknowledgement that these characters should be balanced such that specific enemies can neutralise them in unique ways. Rather, it's the same generic effects applied to all, and it diminishes the value of characters in certain situations. Why waste time trying to swing through a group of enemies with a bruiser like Thor when you can just punch everyone faster as Kate Bishop? The difference in strength levels when you've leveled up the characters and applied equipment to boost their power levels ultimately is quite marginal. However, the one thing that Ultimate Alliance got right that Avengers does not is the diversity in enemies, even if it is only superficial. Ultimate Alliance has you fighting everything from Sentinels to the Hordes of Hell and the Mindless Ones. Avengers has you fighting AIM soldiers, followed by AIM robots, and then bigger AIM robots, and that's pretty much it. Heck, there are only two notable boss enemies from the comics. It feels so painfully generic, which only makes it worse when a 5-foot-tall robot holding a shield won't take any damage while I'm wailing on them as the Hulk. Even the most recent announcement of the War for Wakanda expansion at E3 reinforces this issue: more robots and one notable villain with the addition of Claw. While it looks like a much needed shot in the arm, it's also a reminder of the game's core issues. It's funny how much this irks me in both Ultimate Alliance and Avengers, given I've played a significant amount of both Hyrule Warriors and Fire Emblem Warriors, but the balance and tone of these games is markedly different. The idea that you can come up against the odd powerful enemy that blocks your attacks is more an expectation of the aesthetic and style of the game that it presents itself as. Avengers is trying to go for this pseudo-realistic vibe, and when it hits these very large leaps of logic that are so clearly a byproduct of video game contrivance, it really irks me. While I have largely enjoyed playing this game with my brother, it's very pedestrian, and did not leave a lasting impression. I mean, fighting through waves of enemies with friends can be fun, but I have better games for this, Earth Defense Force, that I can play instead. It's ultimately quite forgettable. It's a shame, as there's clearly a lot of love and effort been put into this game, but it's so heavily focused on reproducing well-worn tropes, it doesn't do anything unique that's worth exploring. It doesn't even do that thing that most comic book inspired games do, of referencing elements of the source material in a way that rewards the most ardent fans. Heck, the game's aesthetic is heavily riffing on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it tries its damnedest not to acknowledge it, and for the most part fails to give the characters that charm that fans of the films will recognise. It's a game so desperate to have a broad audience that it doesn't have any identity of its own. So yeah, Moni ran over about my recent spate of Marvel-based games. Out of the two, I would recommend Ultimate Alliance more, but it's also a game that largely runs its course and sadly doesn't merit repeat playthroughs, lest you're playing in multiplayer. Thanks for watching Smoke and Mirrors. Let me know your thoughts on both Ultimate Alliance and Marvel's Avengers. Crystal Dynamics is trying hard to give this game some shelf life and relevance, but I'm just not seeing it. Share your thoughts in the comments, let me know what you think. I'm going to pivot away from comic book games for a while, but in the meantime you can catch more of my yammering here on Smoke and Mirrors, and of course on AI and Games. Take care folks, I'll be back.